here with us. My name is Charlie Little. My pronouns are she, they, and to give a visual self-description, I'm a white person in their mid-20s, curly, longish, dark blonde hair in the style of a wolf cut. I'm wearing a rather lovely wintry red jumper, and I've got a quite boring white wall background. Um, I'm an access consultant, working in film exhibition and supporting film exhibitors on access for deaf and disabled audiences. I'm also the BFI FAN's EDI champion, working with the membership, working out with Film Hub Scotland, and engaging deaf and disabled audiences. And I'm working out of Matchbox Cine, who are a group of access advocates and consultants, subtitlers, and audio describers, as well as an exhibitor. We have the lovely Clare Baines with us today. And before I introduce Clare, I just wanted to note that there will be a break about halfway through, but the session will be recorded, so please feel free to do what you need to do to be comfortable and take breaks. Feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourselves, and you can use the Q&A function for any questions that you might have later on. We do have a lot to get through today, which is super exciting. But yeah, if you could please reserve your questions for near the end. But yeah, thank you so much, Clare, for being with us today to talk about accessible cinema for blind audiences, which is the fourth of our BFI FAN EDI in Focus webinar series. Clare Baines, I could introduce you for days, but you're a BFI inclusion partner, an amazing filmmaker and writer. You're also the founder of Crit Club, an accessible podcast which looks at disability in film. But yeah, please say hello, Clare, and anything else you would like to share.
This is so nice. What a lovely introduction, Charlie. I'm blushing. That's the beginning of the sentence. Hello everyone. My name is Clare Baines. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman in my also mid-20s. I have dyed red hair. It's quite long now, actually. And it is wavy. I am wearing a black vest. I'm wearing two gold chains, two gold earrings also. And I realise now that I'm actually wearing the same bottom half of my outfit as in that photo, which is quite embarrassing. I'm wearing leather trousers and my Kill Bill trainers. Yeah, it's an absolute delight to be here to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which I don't think often gets spoken enough about in terms of like access and audiences, which is especially within like cinema and theatrical centres, which is blindness and sight loss. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. And I suppose just because you mentioned the photo, that image is a lovely shot of yourself, me, and Tara Brown at the recent Scottish Queer International Film Festival, talking about We Crit Film and talking about access from production to exhibition. Wearing a magnificent outfit as always. And yeah, thanks so much for being here. And another thing I wanted to mention, actually, just as part of your introduction, is that you spearheaded Busting the Bias Film Festival as part of your role at BFI, which is a disability film festival held at BFI South Bank. So everyone listening, do check that out. Just to do a session agenda, today we'll be talking a little bit about language. We'll give you a glossary. We'll do a very fun blindness 101. And kind of if you're someone that doesn't know that much about the experience of blindness or the spectrum of sight loss, don't worry, we've got you covered. And we'll talk a bit about audio description and facilitating AD screenings and some top tips and kind of we're able to bring our insights as we're both people with sight loss that enjoy going to the movies. We'll have a break and then we'll talk a bit about accessible communication, so things like writing alt text and image descriptions. And then hopefully we'll have enough time to talk a bit about venue access, so practical, physical things that you can do to make spaces more welcoming and safe for blind people. And we'll talk about programming as well, as I think when we're talking about access and inclusion for audiences, programming and the actual stories that we screen is often forgotten about. So we'll do that, and then there'll be time at the end for any questions. I thought I'd share just a collage of photos here of me and Claire on our movie-going adventures. We've got a photo of myself here at the recent Edinburgh International Film Festival on the red carpet. We've also got a photo from Busting the Bias last year, the festival I just mentioned, and a group of amazing disabled creatives on the red carpet. Photo of me in the middle being very much silly and holding not just my own cane, but also Claire's.
But my cane too.
And then we've got a photo of Claire outside Cameo in Edinburgh when we went to the Edinburgh International Film Festival, and then another photo of Claire outside the lovely Watershed in Bristol. And yeah, Claire, I wondered, I can go first, but I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about what it means going to the cinema as a disabled person. I know myself, especially because there's so many misconceptions around people's who are blind and their experiences of enjoying art. Going to the cinema or any creative space can be quite daunting for me, especially since using a white cane. So now I'm visibly disabled. And the way I go to the cinema is one that takes a lot of care and thought, and often having to get over a certain amount of anxiety. So, really planning out my route, especially if I'm going by myself. There's only one cinema that I feel comfortable going to by myself on solo trips because I've gotten to know the venue really well, but I'm also confident in the staff being able to support me if need be. I have to go earlier so that I can go and sit and find my seat whilst the lights are still on before the trailers are playing. I have to really double check with the staff that they're going to be playing the film with descriptive subtitles because I'm not just partially sighted, I'm also deaf. So I use descriptive subtitles rather than audio description because of the type of sight loss that I have. And yeah, it can be quite a nerve-wracking experience when it's, accessible. It's the most joyous experience, of course. I love films. I always have. I love enjoying them in a communal space. But yeah, I just wondered if you had any thoughts on your experiences as a blind person going to film industry events
It's
or
definitely
films in general.
films and oh yeah, I mean it's a mixed bag.
Mhm.
I think that's the thing is like as a blind person attending cinema, you never know what you're going to experience.
Mhm.
Like there's so many what ifs, and I think because once you've had like one negative experience, it's very hard to decenter that from your film going practices, perhaps. So like for example, I went to the cinema 3 times in the last week. I went to the BFI IMAX twice, where I had two quite negative experiences, and then yesterday I went to the Picture House Central. I had the most gorgeous, glorious time ever, and I was like, this is what cinema going experience is about, and I felt so valued as a sight loss audience member, which even for the organization that I do work for, like I had slightly different experiences, which is interesting in itself in terms of like what is best practice. But I think the thing is, when it is done well, it is so transformational. And I think that speaks to the fact that you feel comfortable only going to one venue and you've built up that relationship. And I
Mhm.
think that's what a lot of this boils down to is like, how do you build relationships with those audiences? Which is the question that why we're here. But yeah,
Exactly.
I had a gorgeous time and like They spoke to me about the audio description. They said, where's the best place for the audio description to be heard? Like certain cinemas, like the signal's weaker in different areas. Um, they like found a like seat that worked best for me in terms of both audio description signal, but also in terms of like my sight loss. I like being at the back of the screen. It's the best place for me. But obviously, as we're going to go into, there's so many different types of sight loss. So there's so many
Yeah.
different things that go into that. So just like asking questions is so fundamental into making a gorgeous experience. But I'm sure, no doubt, we will get into that later on.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do a quick kind of glossary and just touch on inclusive language because I feel like the reason that a lot of sighted people feel uncomfortable talking about disability or sight loss is that they don't really know what language to use. They don't necessarily want to offend anyone. And you do have to be proactive and go and do the research or, find, I mean, don't find the first blind person that you encounter and ask them, but I just mean listen to people. So in terms of the glossary, we'll be talking a lot today about audio description. Sometimes that can be quite long to say, so we might shorten it to AD. So that's what we're referring to when we say AD. And we'll talk about what audio description is later on, but essentially it is a audio commentary or sorry, descriptive track that verbally describes what's happening on screen, and a lot of blind and partially sighted people, but not all, use this when going to the movies or watching movies at home. Might also mention descriptive subtitles or DS. That's captions, and of course, because there's such a spectrum of sight loss, some people might use descriptive subtitles rather than audio description, like I do myself because I'm deaf-blind rather than just partially sighted. We're going to be using identity first language, and I know that this is something that the BFI practice anyways. Identity first language aligned with the social model of disability, which we'll touch on in a minute. So if you're hearing us saying disabled audiences, disabled people, blind and partially sighted people, those kind of structure rather than say audiences with disability. That's an example of identity first language. We'll talk about that a little bit later. You might hear us mention RNIB a few times. That's the Royal National Institute for Blind People, which is the national charity in the UK for people with sight loss. And then in terms of actual language around sight loss, so one that's used a lot is what I'm saying right now is sight loss. And again, this is something that not every person who's blind likes to use because a lot of people are born blind or visually impaired, so they don't necessarily see it as something that they lost, sorry. But blind and partially sighted seems to be the language that a lot of the community, but also major advocacy charities in the UK are using. Visually impaired is also another popular term that's used. You might hear of the term low vision, and that is a certain type of sight loss, but I just thought I'd mention that in case you come across it. So in terms of those four, blind and partially sighted, visually impaired, sight loss, those are terms that are kind of the consensus in terms of describing people that are visually impaired or blind. I would really encourage you to challenge your use of language where it centers negativity. So suffering from blindness or suffering from any kind of disability or anything like that is very much centering a negative association with disability. So I'd really encourage you to kind of challenge those misconceptions around the experience of disability and moving away from that kind of language. I'd also encourage you to rethink phrases such as referring to the blind, the deaf, the disabled. We're not a collective. We're very much not a monolith, and it is a community or a group of people or a demographic that all have very individual experiences. You can have two people who are blind, and they could have completely different experiences of it, just like myself and Claire here. Will have different experiences, perhaps different access needs. So it's just about not kind of grouping people into one particular experience, really. Yeah, Claire, do you have anything you want to add to that before I move on?
think you've done a gorgeous, gorgeous job, Charlie. I think the only other thing that I'd say is like usually when I'm talking or referring to disability is like the wider group in terms of like disability, deafness, and neurodivergent people. So being very inclusive of what the term disability means.
Yes,
But if you want
100%.
to know more, the BFI has preferred terms, so
Yeah,
check them
please
out.
do. Yeah, check them out. And yeah, I would really encourage anyone listening today to make sure that your team also understand the terminology around access provisions as well. Quite
Mm,
often, captions or descriptive subtitles are muddled up with audio description, which I understand at first glance, easy to make. But if you're working at cinema, please make sure that your team understand the different access provisions and their purpose. And yeah, so I'd really encourage people to kind of make sure that they're comfortable with the language that you're using, but also continue that journey. And you can check out the BFI fan access directory. You can check out the BFI's preferred terms document for more insights. But yeah, I just thought we'd begin with that. So here's a fun little graphic that I have, which I did steal from RNIV's Instagram and cropped very badly. So this is actually a Christmas themed graphic, and it's black puddings, right?
black,
And
no, Christmas pudding, not
Christmas
black pudding.
pudding.
Very different vibes, Charlie.
Sorry, that was the Scottish in me
Yeah,
coming
no,
out. Thank you. Christmas puddings, right?
yeah.
And they're meant to kind of give an indication, a very basic simulation of what it might be like to have certain different types of sight loss. So we've got here in the top left, we've got just, someone that doesn't have any sight loss in the way that they're viewing a Christmas pudding. We've got an example of what it might be like to have glaucoma. We've got an example of what it might be like to have cataracts. We've got an example of what it might be like to have AMD. So this is just an example to really emphasize what a spectrum it is in terms of the way that people might see. There's over 2 million people in the UK that have some form of sight loss. And then there's 320,000 people in the UK that are registered as blind or partially sighted in the UK. And, there's a large portion of these numbers where they're 65 or older, and so that's 80%, and around 60% or 75% or older. And 93% of registered blind and partially sighted people can see something. They have some residual vision. That could be, they might have light perception. They might be able to see shapes and outlines and silhouettes. They might be able to see shadows. There's a vast spectrum of conditions and experiences when it comes to sight loss. So it's very important that uh, there's not an automatic assumption of what someone might be able to see or not see. In my case, I don't have any peripheral vision, so it can often be described as tunnel vision, which is why I might sit at the back of the cinema so I can see everything within the small field of vision that I have. I also struggle with glare and night blindness. So those are my personal experiences of sight loss, and I often, because when I'm out and about, and because I can use my phone and I can, look people in the eye and things like that, people have accused me of being a fraud, of faking it, because there's such a limited understanding of the range of sight loss.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so I also want to take this time to mention that people can also have multiple disabilities or multiple forms of sensory loss as well. So I'm deafblind. I'm hard of hearing and partially sighted, and blind people might have multiple disabilities or identities, and therefore access needs. Um, I also guess I wanted to take the time to also really encourage people to like challenge their own kind of, societally taught uh, beliefs about disabled people, about blind people, and their participation in society and in the arts. I wanted to really, really hit home today that blind people can and do enjoy arts and culture, do enjoy, the art of filmmaking. And yeah, Claire, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to the kind of experience of being a blind person and working in film.
Oh, it's so fascinating how people respond to it. Like initially, like
Mhm.
I think it's the dichotomy of like blindness and a visual medium. People are like, what? What do you mean? That makes no sense. You couldn't possibly, you can't enjoy film. You have no way. And it's like all of that ableism just like smashes you in the face. And it's like, whoa, whoa, that's like a lot to deal with. Um, but that being said, I do really enjoy film. I love storytelling. I think what I also think is really fantastic about film is how film can be used as a gorgeous tool for social change and how
Mhm.
it can create spaces and communities for people to come together. And also, like speaking about all of those ableist beliefs, that's the power that film can have, is to have those conversations, almost like ask people to reflect on those things. And I think that's one, I mean, we're going to come to this about like programming blind stories and programming like representation. And when that becomes so incredibly important is to help um, disrupt those beliefs around blindness, because there is no real representation
Mhm.
in terms of I always think about this, like the only representation that I think I can think of like in cinema is like the Three Blind Mice, and then maybe like a Ray Charles biopic, or like that's kind of all we've got in terms of like blind representation. So um, yeah, I think being a person who works in film and has sight loss is difficult, and it definitely means that there's a lot of responsibility on the blind person to advocate for themselves.
Mhm.
And I think that's why having something like this webinar is so incredibly important, because this is like the beginning, perhaps, of your journey in terms of like how can I start to advocate for sight loss audiences within my venue.
Mhm.
So yeah, really love the arts, really love culture, and definitely have had some difficult experiences being in this space, but also I think that's where the value and the importance is to be in the space and to be visible
Mhm.
and to be visibly disabled,
Mhm.
so that people start to unpack their own biases and beliefs.
Yeah, 100%. And I wanted to mention to people here, and please do like take the time to go and look into this further. You can find resources after the session. We can share them, but also in the BFI FAN at that directorate. But if anyone's not aware of the social model of disability, but also the disability justice model, disability is very much a part of human diversity. And disabled people are so historically and systematically underserved. And that, of course, applies to audiences within cinema. And, going off what we were talking about there with sight loss statistics, we know that disability in general and sight loss is a lot more common than we think it is. And in terms of the social model of disability, that was a framework that was developed by disabled people during the disability rights movement in the 70s, I want to say. And it's very much framing the idea that people are disabled by the way our society is set up, by societal attitudes. So believing that blind people can't enjoy films or can't work, or they can, of course, be disabled by the actual physical setup of things. So, for example, a building not having wheelchair access for people that might use wheelchairs, but of course, people with mobility problems, people with even using prams, things like that. So it very much helps us to uh, decenter the idea that there's something quote unquote wrong with the person that has quote, impairment or health condition, and that they need to be fixed in order to participate in society. So we're moving away from that idea, away from what's known as the medical model, and actually using the social model to support us to recognize what these barriers are and how to deconstruct them. So therefore enabling true independence for disabled people. The disability justice model was developed by the Disability Justice Collective, and that's an intersectional social justice framework which looks at how disability and ableism intersects with other forms of discrimination and oppression, and of course, other marginalized identities. So the experiences of a Black disabled woman will be different from the experiences of a white disabled man, even though they both may experience ableism and disability in it. And having marginalized multiple identities will create unique experiences of discrimination and barriers. And we wanted to mention this as I know the BFI and also the what is now We Crit Film, but the BFI Screen Advisory Disability Screen Advisory Group very much moving towards a intersectional approach and recognizing that all of us benefit from access in an intersectional way, and the only way to move forward with that is to be holistic in the way that we treat access. And Claire, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
I feel like you've done a really wonderful job. Yeah, I think disability justice is all about collective liberation. It's all about being led by those who are most marginalized and recognizing that there are different levels of access, different levels of lived experience in terms of and using that as a point of leadership and as a point of learning and ensuring that everybody is heard. Yeah, I think it's been really incredible to see the shift in the BFI's Disability Screen Advisory Group, now We Crit Film, a much sexier name.
Much sexier.
Yeah, it's very, it's all about collective liberation and cross-disability solidarity. And if that's something that we can embody, that can only be a positive thing.
Absolutely. And I think just to say to people here, please do take the time to learn about the social and disability justice models, because it is core to really truly tackling ableism and being actively anti-ableist. And we can talk about some like anti-ableist action that you as an individual might want to incorporate after the session. Just to have an image here, and it's from the 1993 Disability Independence March in New York City. So we got a black and white image of some protesters and marchers, and there's a banner that has the quote from Martin Luther King Jr. And justice anywhere, the threat to justice everywhere. So I just thought I'd include that image. And do check out the film Crit Camp, especially in terms of cross-disability and intersectional examples of activism. So we're going to go on to a quick Menti question, and I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but we're going to be doing a couple of Menti questions throughout the session today. So I'll stop screen sharing and we'll have a question on the screen, and you can put in the code on your personal device or on your laptop and answer this question, and it's a live response. So the code, if you need me to read it out, is you go to the website menti.com, so menti.com, and then the code is 641222906. We'll also pop it into the chat. I just wanted to see if anyone here had actually ever watched a film or a television show with audio description. So I'll just give you all a second to put that in. If it's easier for you, feel free to put your answer in the chat function. Have you listened to any good audio description recently, Claire?
Do you know what? Bird yesterday. So I went to go see the BFI back title Bird by Andrea Arnold. And
Wonderful.
the AD really popped off. It was really good. I was like, oh, this is actually really good. There was only one moment where I was like, oh, not sure about that. But on the whole, for an audio description track, that's pretty impressive. Like it was, yeah, really well done. And I also think like I don't know who read it, but she did a wonderful job and it like didn't really distract because I think sometimes
Mhm.
um depending on the voice, it can really start to like gnarl away at your
Mhm.
spirit, is perhaps the best way to describe it. So yeah, but this is very exciting, this little Mentimeter.
Yeah, it's fun, right? I really enjoy
Yeah.
it. So we've got two people that have, so congratulations. And then boo to the three people that haven't. But that's okay because we're going to change that. Because I'm going to show a clip. So yeah, we'll start with a Menti, and then I'll share a clip of one of my favorite examples of audio description. So just bear with while I get that sorted. I hope that's coming up okay.
Yeah, you can see that.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I'm just gonna play it and let me know if the sound's not working. Oh, I'll note just now that I've got descriptive subtitles for this clip, which also includes not just the dialogue, but also a description of the audio description narration. That isn't a typical access provision, but I thought I would include it for today, especially just to make it more accessible for anyone that might not be able to access the audio description. But I just wanted to note that that's not a typical access provision, but maybe it should be. We can maybe touch on that later.
From the creators of Tangled and Wreck-It Ralph, Disney. A carrot-nosed, coal-eyed snowman shuffles up to a purple flower peeping out of deep snow.
Ooh, hello.
He takes a deep sniff. His nose lands on a frozen pond. A reindeer looks up and pants like a dog. Seeing the reindeer slip on the ice, the snowman smiles and moves towards him, though actually he's running on the spot. The reindeer falls on his chin. The snowman uses his arm as a crutch. The reindeer paddles his front legs. Head over heels, the snowman crawls along the ice. The reindeer does the breaststroke. The snowman rolls his body, but flips onto his back. The reindeer's tongue sticks to the ice. The snowman hurls his head. Twig arm and reindeer lips tug at the carrot. The carrot flies off and lands in soft snow. The reindeer goes after it with snowman and his body parts hanging on his tail. The snowman puts himself back together again and glumly contemplates his noseless state. The reindeer jams the carrot back in place and pants like a proud puppy. The snowman pats him with his stick-thin arm, then goes to sneeze. He grabs his nose with both hands. His head shoots off. Frozen, coming this winter.
I just love that example so much. I share it at any point that I can. And I just wanted to give you all an example of how amazing audio description can be and how it can really match the tone and the beat of whatever is happening on screen. Yeah, what did you think of that example, Claire?
I loved it. It made my disabled heart sing. Yeah, it was really great. And I think, as you precisely said, and especially because like that's such a comedic scene, the way that it is, there's a lot of moving parts in that it has to describe, but it does a really good job of like hitting every moment and nothing's missed out.
Hmm. Exactly. And yeah, just to note, my colleague that Matchbox Linny made the descriptive subtitles for that clip, but they also do audio description as well within independent film exhibition. But yeah, it's a clip that I really enjoy showing as often as I can, and for anyone that's not experienced AD before as well. And it's such a skilled and judgment-based profession as well. I really do take my hats off to the people that write the scripts and the people that right, narration and high quality audio description can really enhance a film experience for people. So just to give a quick definition, audio description is an additional audio commentary track, which would explain any important visual information that's happening on screen. So that would be things like body language, facial expressions, and movement, the kind of landscape and locations, and of course, any other important visual cues as part of the film storytelling. The commentary should never be overlapping with the film's original dialogue and soundtrack. So any AD should be organically integrated. When it comes to going to the cinema, AD is usually delivered through headsets. So if the film had audio description, technically any screening of that film can be played with audio description because it only goes through the headset that's provided to someone at the box office. It's not played aloud through the films, through the cinema's speakers, if that makes sense. If you're interested in learning how to provide audio description in a more DIY space, a non-theatrical space, because not every venue or cinema is necessarily set up to actually have embedded audio description facility. My colleagues at Matchbox Cine host their weird weekend screenings and festivals out of a new, much more DIY space called Offline, and they wrote a really interesting blog on how they're able to facilitate audio description with things like portable headsets and things like that. Claire, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything about your experience of using audio description. We can get into kind of like some top tips of providing audio description, but I don't know if you had anything off the top of your head just now.
Yeah, I think the thing is with audio description is like as a technology, so the way that it works is like radio frequencies. Well, there's multiple different ways. So there's radio frequencies, there's like Wi-Fi, and it's interesting to see like how this technology has evolved. And also within the cinema space, there's only like really one person like who at the moment consistently provides it, which is Dolby. But it's interesting to see how startups have kind of like innovated in this space. So the traditional, your sort of like audio description setup is like radio frequency. Now the problems with that is one, there's like areas within a cinema that the signal can't reach the headsets. So a recent experience I had at the BFI IMAX is that the seats I was sat in, the signal didn't reach. So what you kind of hear is like a very faint voice, in the distance, and you're like, I can almost hear it. I can almost understand what's happening. But I just got to the point where I was like, I'm just going to switch this off because it's actually just driving me insane and almost to the point of a migraine. So in terms of how, let's say you have a cinema, but you're not sure about your AD signal, you can get a little map made. You can put that online on your website so that when sight loss customers are booking, they know the areas of where AD can actually be reached. So I think this is the thing is like, obviously, access isn't an always perfect solution, but I think the transparency about what you can and can't do is so valued by audiences. So that's one thing I would definitely say. And then, like, as you said, if you're in a non-traditional space, you can hire in AD. So like, let's say you're thinking of doing a screening of something in like a bit more DIY way, you can like hire it in. I've done that before for some short film screenings, and that's been incredibly successful, which has been really great. And then the future, what's the future of AD? I'm a really big, actually, I haven't tried it out yet, and I'm going to screening tonight where I am, so perhaps I'll have to let you all know. But there's movements in terms of like downloading apps so that you can bring your own headphones. You can have it on your phone, which would be, I honestly think, transformational because in terms of like AD headsets, they're not the most comfortable. So being able to bring
What's the name of the app?
Sennheiser.
Okay, that's really interesting to know. Yeah, please do report back.
So Sennheiser, and then I think there's also one in like Sweden that's called Wave or something. I'll double check that. But there's like movements within the AD space of people evolving this technology, so that you can have your own more personalized, comfortable experience, which will be, I honestly think, such a game changer. So that's the kind of experiences and the current lay of the land when it comes to audio description.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I guess in terms of some tips I had was that for exhibitors to make sure that the audio description heads that they have are actually charged. Some of them need to be charged. Make sure there's no duds or broken ones, and that you're not going to provide someone with a broken headset and then they sit down, have to wait for the film to start. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Have to, and especially if you're someone and you're by yourself and you're blind and having to come back and find a staff member to help, that's not necessarily possible. So also make sure your staff actually know how many sets there are, how many there are, and make sure this information is transparent on your website as well. And especially if you're doing outreach and you want to invite, you want to do outreach with a local blind charity and you're inviting like, 10 people to come to your screening, but you've got like two pairs of headsets, like, and all of those people need to use it. Like that's not going to work out. And making sure that your staff actually know how they work, how the headsets work, and that they know how to show someone with sight loss how to use them. And that just goes hand in hand with like general sight loss awareness training that you should maybe arrange for your staff. But often I've had people demonstrate to me a headset using very sight-led information, so like over there, or you just get them over there, or like, oh, you can see this icon here, rather than using like more tactile based information, or even just checking with the person, oh, let me know like how much sighted guidance you need, you know. Claire mentioned an audio description like signal map. That's a really kind of innovative way to let customers know like where the best seating is. As we know that funding and technology can be quite limited, but working the best with what you do have. And another thing I would mention is make sure that your AD screenings are listed correctly on your website. Please.
Yeah.
And make sure that if you're like someone that's working out of different venues, for example, and you want to provide audio description for your screening, make sure that the screening room actually has AD, like the facility. I've worked with people where they've booked it and the room didn't actually enable AD, they did that. So those are just some like top points off the top of my head, but it is something that you should, think about. The devil's in the detail, very much so, and it can make or break someone's experience. And like I say, like if someone sits down, starts the film, it's not working, that of course is such a negative experience. It's and it's not one that they paid for, to be honest, to be quite frank. But yeah, Claire, please stop me from ranting.
No, I think you made some really valid points. I completely forgot the basics. And yeah, I think it's the, I don't want to say humiliation, that feels like quite a strong word, but especially if you're not on the edge of a row and your audio description headset isn't working, and let's say it's a sold out screening, the sort of like shame that you feel from other audience members and the kind of like, movement of trying to like sort this situation out, and the fact that I feel like other audience members aren't forgiving, but perhaps there's also a point around like educating other audience members that audio description is in fact a thing. Yeah, charging your headsets. Yeah, I mean that is the classic. That is the classic.
But it's a problem. It is a common problem.
It is a common problem. And another thing that I forgot about is I've had this happen many times where I'm like, oh, does the screening have audio description? And they'll be like, oh yeah, it's subtitled. And I'll be like, no, not the same thing, not the same thing. So having an understanding between audio description and descriptive subtitles and ensuring that front of house staff know the difference is very important.
Yeah, 100%. We're just going to go on a 10-minute break for now, but I'm going to stop screen sharing and we're going to put up the next Menti question if anyone wants to do that whilst you're on your break. But if we can come back in 10 minutes, if you're not bored of us, please come back and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Hello, I'm just going to give it a second to check if the captioner is back.
I'm back.
Okay, thank you so much. Are you okay to keep going?
Yep. Oh,
Brilliant. All right, thank you. Okay. Hope everyone was able to get a nice warm cup of coffee or beverage of your choice. It's absolutely freezing. I'm in Edinburgh today and always, and it's very, very cold. Okay, so we did a Menti question. Thank you for sorting all of that. We've got one organization that does provide AD screening and three that aren't able to. So hopefully after today, you'll be able to use the knowledge and resources to look into that further. We're going to do another Menti question. The next one's going to be about alt text, which we're going to talk about more in this section. So I'll just give that a second to come up. So do you provide alt text for social media images? Again, you just need to go to menti.com. The code is 64122906. So I'll just give that a second to come through, but Claire, are you ready to go? Do you have a beverage? You
I
ready to
have
keep
got my
going?
fingers, so quite musical, really. I've changed rooms. I'm ready to go.
And what a lovely looking room it
Yeah,
seems to
the
be.
BFI. Who knew? So many different film posters, so little time.
So we got some answers coming through. So we have
Mhm.
one that doesn't know what it is. So we'll talk more about that, and hopefully you'll find that information useful. We got one yes. Um, And we actually did have a question come through in the Q&A, and I thought I'd answer it in this portion. I know we said we'd do questions at the end, but it'll be quite relevant because we're going to be talking a bit about accessible communications for blind audiences. And yeah, so we'll just finish with the Menti, and I'll share my screen and get back to the presentation. Um, Brilliant. That coming up, okay. Oh, awesome.
Perfect.
Amazing. So yeah, we had a question come through, and it was about how to make the audio description map that we mentioned accessible for someone who's visually impaired. And one thing I wanted to say was that you could you could have both a visual map because, some people that are partially sighted have some sight, like I do, or you could just have a written form. It might even be easier to just say which rows or seats have a weak signal. So actually writing it on your website so that someone who might use assistive technology like a screen reader or someone who is able to read written text would be able to follow that more than say a visual map. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add, Claire.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good valid point, but I think it's also sometimes a visual map is also okay. Um,
Yeah.
so I can always share with you and therefore with all the attendees what the BFI IMAX has in terms
Mhm.
of how they represent. So they have like a red zone, a yellow zone, and a green zone.
Oh,
Um,
okay. So they have, I didn't realize that IMAX also have an actual AD
yes, they actually
map.
have an
Ah,
actual AD map that I
okay.
again exists but was not on the website. But that's a whole nother again, this is coming to the point of how do you make your communications more accessible
Hmm.
by having those things accessible so that
Yeah.
people can use them. So yeah, I can share that map in terms of like a visual aid, but also
Mhm.
again, I think what you said is really valuable in terms of the fact that obviously some blind people can't use that map. So how do you
Mhm.
make that accessible for them? So it's a yes and I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing I would encourage people to look into is learning how to write alt text or image descriptions. And for people who don't know, a lot of blind people use assistive technology known as a screen reader, which is a software, or sometimes it can be a hardware connected to your personal device, like a computer. And it would, well, with the hardware, it would transcribe information to Braille, which is the kind of tactile bumps that some blind people use, or it can be the software, and that would be text to speech. So it would be reading aloud what is on the screen, what is written on the screen. And when we have image content, when we have images on websites, on social media, anything at all, that doesn't come with an inbuilt description. So people have to write the descriptions of the image themselves. Alt text is invisible. It's described as being invisible because when you're on the back end and you're uploading a social media post or something on your website, and there'll usually be a box where you can write in your description, that's not visible to a user that's not using a screen reader. So really what would happen is the screen reader, the technology would go over the image and it would transcribe the information to the user. Image descriptions are where they're visible. So you might see sometimes on social media content where people put in the post caption a image description that's seen to anyone that's using or not using a screen reader, might be in the comments. And that's just a way to make image content more accessible to blind and partially sighted people. And having both alt text and then a visible image description means that anyone can use it and benefit from it, even if you're not using a screen reader. And sometimes social media and website alt text functions glitch. Sometimes they're not compatible with all forms of assistive technology, so it acts as a safety net. So all you really need to do is copy what's written into the alt text and then paste it into your caption or your comments, depending on the the word limit, like you might have on Twitter or something like that. I've got an example here of what it on Twitter. Sometimes you used to be able to press like the alt text button on images if there is any written and be able to see it. I don't think that's available anymore on Twitter. That was just an example of alt text I had written for an image and what it might appear in its written form to someone that's not using a screen reader. I know this all sounds like a lot of information, and we do have a section in the BFI fans access directory that puts step-by-step guides per platform on how to actually upload alt text and write image description. We'll do like a small exercise in a second, but in terms of going back to the question we had about an audio description map, you could have a visual map, which some people will be able to use, but you could also write an image description for the map, which is embedded in the image, or you can have it visible as part of the kind of accompanying text, or you can just, in written text explain, row L, the entire row L has poor signal. The rest of the screening room has good signal, and then people, when booking their tickets, can make sure they're in the right row. So that's the kind of approach I would take, anyways, in terms of like all the safety nets. So a visual map, written guidance, and also alt text. In terms of other things that you can do to make your communications more accessible, and one thing I would also mention, actually, just to backtrack, is that when you're sending like emails and doing any kind of outreach, I think you should do this anyways, regardless of whether you're doing specific outreach towards visually impaired individuals or sight loss charities. But you can, if you're including images in your outreach emails, like posters, flyers, things like that, is including an image description within the email as well, and not just assuming that everyone that you're contacting is cited if they're, not within your specific outreach. That should just be part of your practice in terms of just accessible communications for everyone, not just when you're specifically targeting blind audiences. One other thing is that if you're sharing like trailers and things like that over email or social media, it's harder to source, and obviously audio description isn't necessarily always available with distributors, especially within independent film, let alone their video assets, so trailers and video clips. But if you have an audio described trailer, and you can always ask, remember, you can ask filmmakers and distributors what access materials they have, but you have an AD trailer, you can share that on your social media or when you're doing outreach. Another thing to think about is if you're sending documents, whether they're digital, whether you're printing off documents, say program notes, things like that, is to provide like a larger print version, but also provide like a plain text only version. And that's when I say text only or plain text, that's when you don't have, lots of graphics and colors and, branding that you might have, say, in a program brochure. Again, we have more information on that in the BFI FAN directory, and we can point you to other ones. I would in general just check out RNIB. They have amazing resources and information, and also examples of social media content. So I would definitely just check them out. I'm not able to go through it step by step today because I usually do dedicated sessions to accessible communications and social media because there is so much that you can do. So I would definitely think about things like that as well. And in terms of communications, trying to not use cursive fonts, so using sans serif fonts, so that might be like Arial or Verdana, and that's when it's not cursive and it's up and down, and that's beneficial for just general readability, people with dyslexia, but also partially sighted people, and kind of using a minimum of text size 12 to 14. In my email, I put a note that I prefer to receive emails in a certain text size just because it causes me a lot of eye strain to be reading really tiny font. So those are some things that you can do to make your communication more accessible, and thinking about it in a holistic way beyond, okay, we are playing the film with audio description. Every blind person in the area is going to be able to be there. And very much need to manage that expectation. It's about building your audience and building that audience trust, just like me and Claire were talking about earlier. I'll go into doing a quick example of alt text, but Claire, did you have anything you wanted to add or kind of emphasize?
Yeah, the only thing with alt text is like, how do you make it anti-racist? Which is something, again, we don't have to really go into this. But I really point to the work of like Black Audio Description, like Black Audio Film Collective, who do audio description tracks that like speak to like Black and global majority lived experiences. And I think it's all about being specific. And if you don't know, then don't make any assumptions.
Yeah, a very important point. And if you check out the directory, it will give you guides on how to describe people. And things like gender and race and disability come into that. That can make a lot of people nervous and therefore don't want to engage in writing alt text, but please don't do that. It's all a part of, erasing bias. So yeah, do check out the Black Audio Describers collectives, Claire. We'll share the resource as well afterwards. I think they're in my directory already, but yeah, they do really brilliant work. Yeah, I just wanted to do a quick example so that people have ideas. Yeah, if anyone wants to put into the chat, like if you're writing alt text, the first kind of things that you would mention about this image and then I'll go on to what I wrote. If anyone has the time to, in the chat right now, put, the things that jump out to them in terms of information. So, the fact that there's red chairs, things like that, feel free to do so. Whenever I do presentations, I always think about being a student, and my poor lecturers and teachers who were very much shouting into the void. But so this is the example that I wrote, and please bear in mind that I am also partially sighted, and when you're partially sighted and writing image descriptions or giving visual self-description, which you may have noticed at the beginning, I get quite nervous because the whole point of image descriptions is to be accurate, and I can't always do that. But here's what I interpreted it. And the thing to remember about alt text and writing image descriptions, it is always down to interpretation. Even if you're sighted, we see things in a different way, different things jump out to us. So when I asked people about that image before, and I asked them, oh, how would you describe it? They mentioned different things. So people might say the red chairs are the most important thing. Some people might say that the fact that it's empty is the most important thing. So I wrote here, a large empty cinema screening room with the lights on, the camera is facing a blank but white and lit cinema screen. There are numerous rows of red cinema seats from the back of the room towards the screen. And that's a very kind of concise example. That's the way I interpret it. People might write it in a different way, but the most important information is that it's a large empty cinema screening room. There's numerous red seats. There's nothing actually playing on the screen. To me, that's the most important information that's being conveyed. If you just wrote cinema screening room, I would think of it as being full. I would think of a film being played, but the reality is that that's not what's happening in that image. So I just thought I'd share that example just to give an idea to people. And when you're writing an image description, if you're doing it through alt text, you don't necessarily have to say a photo of, because the screen reader is able to identify that it's an image. So it'll automatically say that. It's not the end of the world if you say a photo off, just something to bear in mind. Claire, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I thought that was gorgeous. I think it is just about stating the obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, stating the obvious for a blind person. What a lot of sighted people think, oh, that's really obvious, though, because they just process information in such a different way, right? So it's just about kind of remembering that and challenging that.
Yeah,
and
completely.
Yeah, don't feel like you have to write a novel either. It's meant to be concise. You can, descriptive as well. Yeah, you can learn more about how to write alt text, but that's something I definitely encourage. So just because we're a bit short for time, we could talk about this all day, and we wish we could.
I wish I could. Yeah, that's so true.
Who needs to work? We can just rant and vent, and see who sticks around. But we're not going to do that because we want everyone here to take away some useful information rather than listening to blind people just rant and vent. So in terms of physical spaces for blind audiences, I just wanted to put some pointers here, which I'll go through. And you need to think about the audience experience from the moment they leave their place of residence to when they're coming back. So things like transport can be, a huge barrier for a lot of people, disabled or not. So in terms of venue spaces, I often find personally, and with a lot of other blind people that I talk to, is that wheelchair access, like traditional wheelchair access and step-free access, is often accessible for blind people. And that's how I find, if I know that a space is wheelchair accessible or it has step-free access, that meets my access needs in terms of the space. So that might be accessible toilet facilities, that might be step-free access or elevator access. That might be the use of handrails as well. Another thing to mention is that with stairs, if you do have stairs, because a lot of blind and visually impaired people are perfectly happy to use stairs. Contrast edging is a big thing that I really appreciate. And a lot of public buildings and pathways are meant to have contrast edgings. And when I say contrast edges, I mean when you have a row of steps, or maybe even like one or two, and at the edge, at the end of the step, there'll be a contrast strip. So it might be yellow, it might be black. It depends on what the actual color of the steps are, but it's meant to create contrast, so it's easier for people to see. So a lot of blind people don't have depth perception. I am one of them. Contrast edges really support me, and feeling more safe and confident going up and down stairs, especially if there's spaces that don't have wheelchair accessibility. Another thing is lighting. And I know when we think about cinemas, they're meant to be traditionally dark spaces. And I agree that once the film is playing, it should be dark, or darker. But when you have foyers and accompanying bars, or even when there's introductions and Q&As, or when the trailers are playing before the film actually begins, when it's really dark or really dim lighting, that's a struggle for a lot of people. And a lot of older people do have night blindness, and night blindness is actually a lot more common than we think it is. I think lighting can be a way that you can make your space more accessible. And I'm not saying you have to have super bright, glary lights. That can also be a barrier, but especially if you're welcoming and making more of an effort to engage blind audiences, thinking about the lighting of your space. Another thing is, or rather, I think the first thing is staff training. I mentioned earlier, having your staff be trained in just general disability awareness, but specific sight loss awareness as well, and learn how to sight guide someone. Again, you can look at guide dogs, RNIB. They have plenty of free online resources, but making sure that your staff are confident in assisting customers with sight loss is huge. It's really huge, because the biggest barrier for me in life is people, to be honest, rather than my actual disability. When I go to a space, I often feel self-conscious or embarrassed or just really, unpleasant, because people are behaving towards me in a way that's extremely ableist or uncomfortable. And when I go to a new cinema or art space and I've got my white cane and I can see the panic on a staff member's face because they don't know what to do with me. And so I would really, really, even if you don't have all the funding in the world, you don't have all the access provisions in the world, making sure that your team, your volunteers, your staff are, have a very good kind of understanding of supporting people with access needs can be a make or break experience for a lot of disabled people in general. Claire, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that in terms of actual customer service.
Yeah, I mean, I said it earlier, understanding what audio description is, understanding the difference between audio description and descriptive subtitles. As you said, I think it's comes down to attitudes and how people interact. And so much of it is just down to people asking questions rather than making assumptions. Because I think that's often the thing that happens to me, is that people assume things about what I need. And that's where the conflict comes from, is that misunderstanding. So yeah, I would always say ask questions and just be led by the person, because it's the thing. Once you met one disabled person, you've met one disabled person. Not it's not like as you always say, like it's not a monolith experience, and everybody's so individual. So
Mhm.
yeah, I would definitely say that. And I'd say like personally for like my own specific needs that like I find really useful are walkthrough videos. So understanding a space, where to go, where to get tickets, people talking about that, like talking through that and like doing an audio described version of that rather than just relying on the visuals. I find really beneficial and signage. Oh my
Mhm.
goodness, in so many places, the signage is less than good. It's
Subpar.
not good. Yeah, subpar. So having signage that like is continuous and like actually takes you on the journey rather than just being in random spaces is so beneficial and also contrasting um, because otherwise it's really hard to identify. So yes,
Mhm.
that's what I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much for mentioning two of my points on the slide. Um, because we're very limited for time. But I also wanted to mention, just because I don't think many people will understand what I mean by tactile pathways, but when you're at like a crossing or at the top of stairs, sometimes you'll have like tactile bumps, and that's for people with guide dogs, with canes, or even just their feet, to recognize that they need to stop. So, I would really look into, especially if you got a lot of stairs, into getting kind of tactile strips. Again, we can share some resources, but tactile pathways are a way that a lot of blind people, especially if they use canes, are able to navigate. So these are just some examples, and I thought we would round up by talking a bit about programming. Me and Claire are both curators and programmers, and lovely Claire here is also a filmmaker. And it was a Roundhouse funded film, right? Blind Date,
Yeah.
short film. I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Blind Date very much came out of my frustrations of working within the BFI and of many people talking about sight loss and audio description and being quite highly critical of it, perhaps. And I wanted to embody a project where the filmmaking process itself was an exploration of what filmmaking could and should be in terms of how can you make an entirely accessible film set? How can you make it so that disabled cast, disabled crew can be a part of the decision making process and also just excel at their jobs? Like that's fundamentally what we want, isn't it? So yeah, it was that, and then also an exploration of like if I could have any audio description in the whole wide world, what could I have as additional access materials, and as an exploration of character, as an exploration of how audio description in itself can be an art form if it's thought about from the very beginning, rather than as it currently sits as this like weird sort of afterthought. I think in the filmmaking process, how can you embed it at the very beginning? So that's what Blind Date's all about. It's also
Yeah.
about ableism within dating. So that was also some of the experiences. But yeah, I think programming blind stories, I think it's really interesting because I think especially within disability, when it comes to programming, there's a lot of like you have like disabled programming strands, deaf programming strands, neurodivergent programming strands, but I've rarely ever seen sight loss specific
Mhm.
focused programming. Um, which I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what that
Yeah, I
is.
mean, and a lot of the options are like documentaries about
Mm,
people living with sight loss. And I'm not saying that's not valid. Some of my favorite films, I love Vision Portraits, which is a really fantastic documentary, but there's not a lot of like authentic blind representation in films. And we want to encourage people to work with like curators of lived experience and screen blind stories, and you're able to do that in a way where you can contextualize it. So on your podcast, we spoke about Wait Until Dark, which has
yeah.
Audrey Hepburn, and it was a lot less ableist than I thought it would be. It still was pretty ableist, but we were able to platform that film and talk about it. And
Yeah.
you as an exhibitor, I'm saying you, the audience, I can't see, that I couldn't see anyways, but We want you to seek out disability and blind stories and representation and not do it just in a way that, oh, it's, a disability awareness day. We need to do it, like embed it as part of your programming, maybe your festival, maybe you put on pop-up screenings. I know it's harder when you work at a cinema, but you can still invite curators to work with you on like seasons and things like that. Not every disabled person or blind person just wants to watch films about that, but we're such an underrepresented demographic, for lack of a better word. We still want to, I think everyone at some point in their lives want to see themselves on screen in that authentic way. And I put there, just because we're running out of time, so we're not able to discuss it fully, but I found out about RNIB Scotland's partnership with the creators of Dark Soul, which is a concept film project. And I think it screened at Glasgow Film Theatre, but it also won an award at the Celtic Media Festival. And it's an audio concept film that kind of aimed at making cinema more accessible for blind and visually impaired people. And it's an immersive horror film, I think, where it's all audio. There's nothing happening visually. So we can share some information about that for anyone would like to learn a bit more about that. Just because I do want to give people time to ask any questions. I'm just going to pause there. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A function. I'm just going to check it now. Yeah, so we've got one question. So at a festival, when films rarely have considered adding audio description to their films and files, is there any other way to include AD? Maybe this is more of a technical question, but one that's come up at their work because they rarely ever receive audio description tracks. I don't know if you had anything to say to that, Claire, before I jump in.
Yeah, it's really difficult at a film festival level because so much of it is down to the filmmakers, so much of it is down to the funding, so much is down to whether the funder or the filmmaker themselves values AD. I think this is where like the work that I do at the BFI is incredibly important in terms of like advocating how the BFI can be a thought leader in terms of how can we influence the industry to see the shift of people creating audio description tracks. I think, for example, what I would love to see, don't know if it will happen, but like at London Film Festival, in order to apply, you have to have audio description. Or like, let's say you're in charge. Yeah, let's say you're in charge of a film festival. You make it a part of the requirements so that if you want to enter this film festival, you have to have audio description. You have to have descriptive subtitles. I think that way we will dramatically start to see a shift. I think it will definitely have to come from the more glam situations, maybe a little Cannes, maybe a little Berlinale. If they set the tone, if they set this precedent, I think that's where we'll see the culture shift because I think it's more like an industry-wide problem. And I think I completely understand, like as a exhibitor, as a venue, you want to be able to do your thing, and currently you aren't being given the tools to. And at the end of the day, audio description does cost money to do, like that is a fact. But then also, if this is of use, if this is of interest, maybe this is also a time to lobby the BFI. The people that I work with are probably going to regret me saying that, but like if there is a need to have like an access pot, so that people can create their own audio description, let me know. That would be really interesting. Maybe this is something that we can have a conversation about. And then I will also hand over to you, but also Sidecard is a really great tool and resource in terms of checking for audio description and for descriptive subtitles for a lot of projects of short films.
Yeah, thank you so much for that segue, Claire. If you're a festival, you obviously have, well, it depends on the funding that you receive, of course, but usually you would have a access budget line. So, and I know it can be hard with timeframes and receiving films and programming, but ideally you would incorporate as part of the festival the assumption that some of your films won't have audio description won't have descriptive subtitles, and you would work with a professional subtitler or the audio describer, like at Matchbox, or there's other providers listed on the fan directory. You would work with them to hopefully create AD and DS files for your festival, but you really have to think about it from the beginning and make sure you created a budget line and thought about timeframes and doing that. And yeah, it is really something that we have to create a culture and industry shift. You can also check out Sidecard, which is a free online database for access materials designed to track and record the availability of access materials for films. It's also an information and resource platform, and it was developed by Matchbox with funding and support from various film hubs as part of FAN. So you can look at that as well. I just realized we're going over time. So I think that's everything we have time for today, but I wanted to say a huge thank you to Claire, of course, for bringing her insights and her experiences and her knowledge and supporting me to kind of do a session on access for blind audiences. This is not it. This is, only 90 minutes. So please do carry on your journeys. And I've listed here some kind of anti-ableist actions you can take as individuals, but also hopefully take to your organizations as well. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to join us today. Thank you so much to our live captioner as well. The recording will be shared afterwards, as well as resources, and do feel free to get in touch with either one of us. And thank you all so much again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
Thank you.